If Your Chosen Acted, the first tape in this series, Hasidic Thoughts at Beis Chana, is a powerful injection of Jewish pride. It entreats Jews to accept the responsibility of being chosen and act accordingly, and discusses an aspect of anti-Semitism little known, calling on all Jews to understand themselves and make themselves known, thereby removing the enigma of the chosen people. The notion of being chosen is clarified and put into perspective by explaining the existence of a heavenly people on earth. Primarily, this tape offers the ultimate definition of a Jew.
There's a medrash, a story in the medrash, that tells about the representatives of the nations of the world, the angels that represent the nations of the world. They come before God and they ask, what is Mashiach? What is special about him that will enable him to accomplish the great things that he is going to accomplish? And the Medrash goes on to say that God's answer is that my righteous Mashiach will stand up tall and cause the people of his generation to stand up tall, to stand straight. And then there's the description of all the great things that Mashiach will accomplish, that he will influence the whole world and make the world good, bring heaven to earth, and so on. But the first thing, the first description of Mashiach is that he will stand up straight. And this makes a lot of sense, because if we're going to climb out of our exile after 2,000 years, our biggest problem is going to be our inability to stand up straight. If after 2,000 years of being bent over, of being bowed, of being oppressed, of being yoked by concern and fear and intimidation of the nations, the ability to come out of that demands first and foremost that we be able to straighten up, that we be able to throw off that stoop of Gullus and be able to walk straight. And that's the beginning of Geula, the beginning of redemption. So the unique thing about Mashiach will be that he will stand up straight. And since Mashiach will come at the end of the exile, he will be the only one who can stand up straight. So if we want to recognize Mashiach, the first thing you'll notice is that he stands up straight. And that'll be very noticeable because he'll be the only one standing up straight. Everyone else is to some degree, more or less, bowed by the exile, stooped by the exile. A simple example, without getting into the politics of the issue, there's the big tumult and the question about the West Bank in Israel, about the occupied, or what is called the occupied territories, to return it, not to return it, to give it away, not to give it away. The Rebbe's argument has been all along that since it is a part of Israel, and Israel is an inheritance, a gift from God to us, to Jews, and by a miracle we happen to have that part of Israel, we have no right, we don't have the authority to give it away. It's not ours to give away. It belongs to every Jew, not to a handful of Jews or politicians. And the reason it is ours is because God gave it to us, and we know about this because it says so in the Torah. Now, this should be the line. This should be the answer, the response to the United States, to the United Nations, to the nations of the world, to the enemy, that we can't give it back because it's not ours to give back. Torah says that God intended it, earmarked it for Jews, and when Jews have it, we're not allowed to give it away. The Rebbe goes a step further. The Rebbe says that even those parts of Sinai that were given away, the Rebbe says it's not too late. You can always do tshuva and undo the mistakes you made. And so it wouldn't be wrong for Israel to come to the nations of the world, for the prime minister, whoever, come to the nation of the world and say, listen, I made a mistake. I gave away something that wasn't mine to give away. It was a mistake, and we have to undo it. We'll just have to take it back. Now, people when they hear the Rebbe's argument, they dismiss it out of hand. They say, come on, you're talking about a political situation here. You're talking about political reality. We're talking about the United Nations. We're talking about governments and countries. You can't just come to them and say that the Torah says it's mine, so it's mine. And why not? Why not? So the reaction is, well, since when is Torah an authority on politics? Others say Torah is an authority. If Torah says that that's the way it should be, then that's the way it should be. It's the truth. We know that. You know that, and I know that. But nobody else knows that, and nobody else is going to believe it or accept it. And therefore, although you're right, we can't use that kind of argument because it can't work. So you have two cases, two examples of the burden of Golus. One is that we no longer know the truth of Torah. The other is that even if we know the truth of Torah, we don't think that anyone else will recognize or accept the truth of Torah. And that's not standing up straight. Standing up straight means there's a truth. It's been here all along. Maybe we forget from time to time. Maybe we get verblunget from time to time. The world gets out of hand from time to time, but the truth is still the truth. And the truth has the effect and the impact of truth. And when you talk truth and you tell the truth and you say the truth, people will respond to it in the way that you respond to the truth, in that unique way, in that unique response that truth brings out in people. The Rebbe had a very telling experience as a young man. He was on his way to meet his intended bride, the daughter of the previous Rebbe. Now, he lived in Yekaterinoslav, which is in the Ukraine, and he was on his way to Lubavitch, which is in White Russia, and it was a long journey on the train. So his mother was accompanying him halfway, which meant to the big station, wherever that was, and from the big station he took another train out to Lubavitch. So they traveled all night, and he was going to continue traveling for the rest of the day, so he had to daven. So in the morning, when it came time to daven, the Rebbe took out his tefillin, and he started putting on his tefillin on the train. His mother was frightened. This was a time when the government, and even the average man on the street, did not look kindly on religious observance. So she was afraid there might be an official on the train, it could start a pogrom. But an amazing thing happened. And the Rebbe's mother actually related the story. She says, an amazing thing happened. The people who were sitting near the Rebbe, the non-Jews, the Gentiles who were sitting there near the Rebbe, and they noticed what the Rebbe was doing, they all stood up, and they formed a wall around the Rebbe, blocking him from view, until he finished davening and put his tefillin away, and then they all sat down. And this was without conversation, without arguments, and without debates. The Rebbe did what he had to do, with absolute faith in the rightfulness of what he was doing, and everybody appreciated it. Everybody treated it as such. It's not apologizing. It's not feeling a need to apologize. It's standing up straight. And this leads us to the subject of acting chosen because we are chosen. We have here two mysteries, two eternal mysteries. The mysteries that have defied explanation for as long as we can remember. The first mystery is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a great mystery because there are few things in the world that are as consistent, as universal, as predictable as anti-Semitism. You go from one country to another, from one culture to another, from one religion to another. Their lifestyles are different, their philosophies are different, from one extreme to another. And yet, you find one thing they have in common. They don't like Jews. And what do they know about Jews? Sometimes a lot, sometimes very little, sometimes nothing at all. And yet, all of them have a discomfort with Jews. You hear some of the things that an anti-Semite comes up with concerning Jews and Judaism, and you wonder, what did we do? What could we possibly have done to cause them to suspect such a thing? For example, the argument or the accusation that Jews are plotting to take over the world. I mean, we have our faults, thank God, and we're vulnerable to some legitimate criticisms. But plotting to take over the world at a time when we couldn't even manage our own lives in the ghetto and the shtetl? Where did that come from? Everything has to have some basis in reality. It can't be totally fantastic. Even anti-Semitism. So it's been a mystery. How is it that everybody knows enough to dislike the Jew? On the other side of the coin, the other mystery is, what is a Jew? Well, it's a religion, it's a culture, it's a family, it's a nation. What is it? What is a Jew? And this has been a mystery for as long as we remember. It may be a little strange to quote a non-Jewish source, but I was very impressed with this. A little article appeared in the Anglo-Jewish paper here. A correspondent from Israel was interviewing a professor at an Israeli university, and the professor is a former priest who was teaching philosophy at the University of Israel, in Israel, and he was very upset that people were critical of Israel when Israel went into Lebanon. And he was even more upset that Israel itself, that the Jews in Israel were being apologetic about it, about what Israel was doing in Lebanon. So he came out in a press conference or whatever, and he said very clearly that Israel had every right to do what it did. It was a moral thing. It was the right thing, and so on. So he was being interviewed on that subject, and in the process, having a priest teaching in Israel and pro-Israel and so on, they couldn't help but ask him a couple of questions on religion as well. And one of the questions they asked him was, does he have a definition for this enigma of what is a Jew? And this man, Father Dubois, I believe his name was, is quoted as saying as follows: a Jew is someone who is religious without knowing it. And this is the case with all Jews, from the extreme right to the extreme left. And as a matter of fact, this uniqueness is evident even in Jews who convert to Christianity, because Jews who convert to Christianity do so with a particularly, uniquely Jewish flavor. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean to be religious without knowing it? How can you be religious without knowing it? Religion is a commitment. Religion is a belief. Religion is a devotion. It's an enthusiasm for something. So how can it be that one can be religious without knowing it? Another question. The expression used most often to describe the Jews is that we are a chosen people, which really only brings in more questions than answers. Chosen? Chosen for what? How did we get to be chosen? But the bigger question is, why did God have to choose a people? You read the story of creation in Torah. God doesn't choose anything. He decides beforehand what has to be created, what he needs, and he creates it. So what does it mean that he chose the Jewish people? If he wants a Jewish people, he would create a Jewish people. To choose the Jewish people implies that all people were the same. All people were alike. Then God decided that he needed one people to do a special mission or a special job or get special favors or whatever he chose us for. And so he went around and checked out the candidates and decided to choose us. And so we are the chosen people. So we're Jewish. But what that implies is that it could have been anybody. It was a choice. And God chose us. But he could have chosen somebody else. And then they would have been Jewish. But that really doesn't make any sense. If God wants a chosen people, then he creates a chosen people. And if one is created chosen, then what's the choice? You don't become chosen later. If God wanted a unique kind of people, then that's the kind of people he would create. So why the choice? Another thing, if there is really a difference, if there is a uniqueness that makes the Jew Jewish, then what is there to choose? Living in America and being enamored with the idea of egalitarianism and equality and everybody being equal, everybody being the same, we're very uncomfortable with the idea of a chosen people, and we try to minimize it. We try to neutralize it. We try to make it parv. How do you make it parv? You say that being chosen doesn't mean that we're different. It's just that, well, your grandfather could have been chosen, but he was still swinging from trees, while our grandfather was already learning to read Hebrew, and he was writing books, and he was teaching his children good things, and so he was chosen instead. But if that's the case, then what was the choice? Then there was no choice. You need to choose only when you have a number of things that are truly equal, when they're all the same, when they all serve the same purpose and satisfy the same need. But there are many and you only need one, so you have to choose which one of them are you going to use, which one of them are you going to take. But if there is only one that will satisfy your particular need, and then there are other things that satisfy other needs, but then what's the choice? If you're sitting at the table and there's a bowl of fruit and you want an orange, so you look through the bowl and there's an orange, and there are also apples in the bowl and other fruit. So you take the orange because that's the fruit you want. You're not making a choice. There's only one orange, and all you want is an orange. The fact that there are apples there doesn't offer you an alternatives. So you're not choosing the orange over the apples. You don't want apples, you want oranges. Or you need the orange, you don't need the apple. If you have nothing but apples, and you can only tolerate one apple, then you have to choose which apple is it going to be. That's a choice. But if you don't want apples, if you don't need apples, you want an orange, you can't really call that a choice. What are you choosing? There is nothing to choose. The orange is the only thing that will satisfy this particular need, and the apple won't do it all. God needed a chosen people, so what did he choose? God needed a people with unique devotion. Well, who has that unique devotion? There weren't many candidates, so there really was no choice. You all know the story in the Medrash, where it says that God presented the Torah to Jews after he had already offered it to the other nations of the world. And each of them in turn had refused, had turned them down. Now, doesn't that show that anyone could have been Jewish? Not at all. On the contrary. The whole point of the story is to show how nobody could accept Torah other than Jews, because Torah was really meant for Jews, and Torah fits only Jews. I think that the real meaning of the story, that God offered Torah to the other nations, doesn't mean that he offered them tefillin and kashrus and Pesach. I mean, it wouldn't make too much sense to come to the Egyptians and command them to celebrate Pesach, to eat matzah and maror because of the suffering of your forefathers in Egypt. That wouldn't make much sense at all. God came to the other nations and offered them not the 613 mitzvahs of Torah that are addressed to Jews, but he offered them the 7 mitzvahs that Torah demands of them, and said, do you accept these 7 commandments unhesitatingly, unquestioningly? And they said, no. They said they want to hear what the commandment is before they accept it. Whereas when God came to the Jews and offered us the 613 mitzvahs, we didn't say we want to hear a few examples. We accepted. So it certainly doesn't mean that God went around asking other people whether they wanted to be the Jewish people. I mean, that doesn't make sense at all. They weren't Jewish, And they weren't going to be Jewish. If you want Jews, you have to go to Abraham. He was a Jew. If you want Egyptians, you go to Egypt. You want Mesopotamians, you go to Mesopotamia. But if you want a Jew, you go to the Jew. There is no choice. So what is this chosen people? One further consideration. The statement that we are the chosen people comes from the description of the giving of Torah. Just prior to the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, God says to Moshe, tell the people to prepare to receive the Torah and become to me a chosen people. Now, who is Moshe talking to? He's talking to Jews. The Jews were camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. Why were they there at the foot of Mount Sinai? Because God came and took them out of Egypt with 10 plagues and with miracles and crossing the sea, the splitting of the sea. Why did he take them out of Egypt? Because they were Jewish. So what does this mean? After he chose to take them out of Egypt and chose to bring them to Mount Sinai, he then chooses to give them the Torah, and then he says, when you get the Torah, you will be a chosen people. Well, what are they until then? They're certainly not strangers to God. There's obviously already a difference. They are earmarked for something special. Otherwise, why would God take them out of Egypt? In order to make them a chosen people? So he chose them to make them chosen? And what is this? What's going on? The truth is that the chosen aspect of being Jewish is not really a description of the Jew. A Jew is a condition, a created condition. God created grass, he created trees, he created stones, he created water, animals, humans, and Jews. A Jew is a unique creation. The soul of a Jew is inherently and basically different from the soul of a non-Jew. What is the difference? For this, we really have to look into Kabbalah and so on, but without getting into the mystical things, all things were created by what Torah refers to as God's speech. God said, let there be light, there was light. God said, let the earth give forth vegetation, there was vegetation. God said, let the earth give forth animals, creeping, crawling things, and flying things, so there were animals. So that all creation came about through God's speech, or God's word. But when it came to the soul of the Jew, it says in the Zohar and other places that the soul, the neshama of the Jew, was created by God's thought rather than speech. Now, the implied meaning here of speech is something you can do or not do. As a famous expression, a time to speak and a time to remain silent, to refrain from speaking. Thought is not something you can discontinue. You can't think or not think. Thought goes on constantly. The difference between the creation of the world that was created through speech and that which was created through thought, the Jewish soul, is that that which is created through speech is finite, because there was a time when God did not say, had not yet said, let there be light. And then he said, let there be light. So before he said it, the world did not exist. After he said it, it does exist. So it once was not, and now it is. Therefore, it is finite, it's mortal, it's limited, it's a creation. When you say that the soul of the Jew comes from God's thought, that means that it was something that was always there. It means that the soul of a Jew is not something that comes from an external expression such as speech, but rather from an internal, personal place, an intimate place similar to thought, and therefore the soul of a Jew is a part of God and not a creation at all. In different words, the essence of a Jew, that which makes us Jewish, is our neshama, and our neshama is not a creation. The soul of the Jew is an eternal, infinite part of the eternal, infinite God. That is a Jew, a piece of God. Whoever has this neshama is Jewish. Whoever doesn't have this neshama is not. is a human being created by God, created in the 6 days of creation through God's speech, and therefore is not a Jew. Now, God wants to have a Jewish people, so what is there to choose? What's the choice? You have two different creations. You can't really call the Jew a creation. The neshama of a Jew is not a creation at all. It's a part of God that he invests into creation, but it is of himself, not of the creation. There are certain things that exist and have meaning only outside of myself, in my life. Like my furniture. I have furniture. I need furniture. But it's only functional. Its place in my life is only external, outside of me. My children, on the other hand, are not external. They're not there for any functional reasons. Their place in my life is not external to my life. They are my life. And that's why I don't treat my children the way I treat my furniture. They mean different things to me. They belong to a different part of my existence. The furniture belongs to my external existence. My children belong to my internal existence. If I lose my furniture, it doesn't affect my being. It only affects my external comfort or condition. It's obviously different from a child. When God created the world, he, again, had two things. That which he needed for functional external purposes in the creation. And then there was that part of himself which he invested into creation. That part that affects him personally and intimately is the Jewish soul. The biggest question in Hasidus, which is asked over and over again, is not what is a Jew. The question is, knowing what a Jew is, knowing that our neshama, that which makes us what we are, is a part of God, then the disturbing question is, why would God send a part of himself into such a finite, limited, and sometimes even gross physical condition? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem appropriate for such a divine being to be held in such ungodly conditions. And so the question is asked over and over again, why would God send a soul from the highest heights down to the lowest depths? So the question comes from the recognition that the soul of a Jew is basically not part of creation. And therefore the question of what is the soul doing here in this creation? And with this, we'll understand the first statement that Rashi makes in the Torah. Rashi is the classical commentator on Torah, and his commentary, which was written for children, by the way, because he was a teacher, a Malamed, and somehow the text of his lessons with his students was published and printed, and great scholars to this very day find it challenging and a demanding study, and yet 5-year-olds seem to understand quite well what Rashi is saying. Today, very few people would even dare to study Torah without Rashi. So much so that every printed copy of the Torah, every book of the Torah, has Rashi printed right under the text. So what is the first statement that Rashi makes to his children in the Cheder on the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Torah? The first words are, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. So Rashi says, why does the Torah begin with a description of creation rather than with commandments? Since Torah is basically a book of commandments, a guide to how we should behave in our daily life, so Rashi says the Torah should begin with a commandment, get right down to instructing us in our behavior. And yet it begins with a lengthy description of creation and the history of what happened from the time of creation until the time of the giving of the Torah. And Rashi's answer is, because there will come a time when the nations will accuse the Jews of being crooks, imperialists. They will say, you stole the land from the nations. And what are we going to answer? So the Torah begins with the story of creation so that we will know what to answer. What will we say? We will say, God created heaven and earth. Earth belongs to God. The lands belong to God. So God gave it to the Canaanites for a while, and then he took it from them and gave it to us. So you can't really steal the land. It is God's, and God gives it to whomever he wants. And why does he do it this way? Why does he first give it to other nations and then give it to us? In order to show his strength. The Rebbe, explaining this Rashi, commenting on the Rashi, says that it's a very interesting explanation. The Torah begins with Adam and Eve, and goes on to tell you about Noach and the flood, and then to Avraham, and then to Yitzchak and Yaakov. Before it gets to the first commandment, you have to go through a book and a half. And all of this so that we will know what to say to an anti-Semite who calls us crooks, thieves. Doesn't seem right. And even if that's true, couldn't Rashi find a more appropriate explanation for a 5-year-old? Do you have to tell a 5-year-old about anti-Semitism and imperialism? So the Rebbe points out that in this Rashi, which Rashi is basically quoting the Gemara, it doesn't say the land of Israel. It doesn't say that we will be accused of stealing the land of Israel. It says that we steal the land of the nations. Now, what is the land of the nations? Also, this is not a response to anti-Semitism. This is a response to the Jew who thinks that the anti-Semite in this argument might be correct. So we're not talking about anti-Semitism itself. We're talking about a good question. The good question is, when the Jews were gathered at Mount Sinai and about to receive the Torah, and they had been told by Moshe when they were leaving Egypt, because they were told that they were leaving Egypt because the Egyptians were not a holy people, and they, the Jews, are meant to be a holy people, a nation of priests. And how will this happen? By receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. And so they come to Mount Sinai expecting to hear heavenly things, otherworldly things. But what are they about to hear? What are they going to hear? They're going to hear, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, not commit adultery, honor your mother and father. They wouldn't have survived the shock. So they needed some kind of introduction, some kind of a warning that what is about to be revealed is going to sound very simple, very down to earth, because they're expecting heavenly things, and for good reason. They were told that they were not going to be like other people. They were just told that they had to leave the land of Egypt because they're different, because they are a holy people. So they were not going to understand these commandments. Here we're gathered at Mount Sinai to become a holy people, a heavenly people, and we're told not to steal. You tell me not to work on Shabbos, but what about the rest of the week? If we're a heavenly people, we should rest for 7 days. If we're a heavenly people, it's not enough to say don't steal. We shouldn't have money altogether. What do you mean run a kosher business, an honest business? We shouldn't be running businesses at all. What do you mean eat kosher animals? How does that make you holy? If we're going to be holy, we shouldn't eat at all. We should be fasting as much as possible. And if it means dying, so what? We belong in heaven anyway. So the question that is really a valid question is, if we are a heavenly people, what are we doing on earth? Why are we engaged in earthly activities? Why do the commandments tell us to eat right? They should tell us not to eat at all. Why does the commandment tell us to get married properly? We shouldn't get married at all. Why should we be involved with an honest business? We shouldn't be involved in business at all. So what happens is that not only the anti-Semite, but also the Jew is bothered by this question. And he says, wait a minute, we're trespassing. We are taking away the land of the nations. Which nation? You name it. Wherever Jews have gone, they've been accused of taking away someone's land, of trespassing. We went to Spain. We were told, you can't stay here. This is not your place. went to France, England. They each had their expulsion dates when Jews were thrown out of those lands. We were occupying someone else's land, and we had to move on. Every country we've been to has made the same argument. And the argument is, you are a heavenly people, it says so in the Bible, so fine, go to heaven. But if you're going to live on earth and be normal human beings, then you're trespassing. This is our property. Earth belongs to the nations of the earth. The world belongs to the nations of the world. We are not of the world. We are of heaven. We are strangers. So we're trespassing on land. Which land? Any land. Earth belongs to the nations of the world. That's why they're called the nations of the world. And so God starts the Torah not with the first commandment, because the commandments are all related to the physical world, and we won't understand. So he first has to warn us. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Heaven is not any more of a place for God than is earth. God had to create the heavens as well. And therefore, the part of God, which is the soul of the Jew, doesn't belong in heaven any more than he belongs on earth. The reason for the existence of heaven is that it was a stepping stone towards the creation of the earth. The reason for creation is to elevate the physical condition through godliness that is not immediately evident in the physical world, to bring that which is otherwise ungodly to godliness. And how is that going to come about? Through the neshama. By having the neshama come down into this world, engage in physical activity, engage in worldly activity, but from a godly perspective, with a godly awareness, and through the mitzvahs of Torah, that will elevate the physical condition. What does it mean that Jews are a light to the nations of the world? It means that whereas the nature of the physical condition seems to imply that the world created itself, and therefore has no allegiance to a creator, is not indebted to a creator, when we do mitzvahs in the physical world, with the physical world, it reveals the truth that the physical world is not something separate from God. It is God's creation, created for a godly reason, and the reason is to reveal the godliness that is hidden within the physical condition. Even though the world as we find it conceals God, looking at a table tells us nothing about God. On the contrary, it distracts us from God. It seems to be saying, look, I'm a table. Been here all along. I am a reality unto myself. But by doing mitzvahs with the physical world, we make it a bit more transparent, like washing the dirt off a dirty window. And then you can see through it more clearly. You can see that it's really not meant to block God out at all. On the contrary, the physical thing, can become and must become a window to God. And that elevates the world. It gives the world its godly purpose. Whereas if we don't elevate the world remains what appears to be a contradiction to God, which is certainly not a holy way to be. A Jew is therefore a godly part, a godly being, sent to this world on a mission. So there's a certain discomfort that a Jew has, which is unique to Jews, by the way. And that discomfort is, why am I here? What am I doing here? Now every human being asks himself that question, because every human being has a feeling of wanting to accomplish something. If you're intelligent, life has to make sense. Life has to have a purpose. But with Jews, it's slightly different. Intelligent beings ask, how do we make the most of this existence? The Jewish condition is that inwardly, consciously or unconsciously, we not only want to know how to make the best of life, we don't understand why there is life at all. Now, everybody can ask that question philosophically in a philosophy class, but the Jew is bothered by this question, bothered in his gut. What is this all about? Not how do I make the most of life, or what am I supposed to do with this life, But why life? Why existence at all? And because we find it difficult to answer that question, that's why we find a disproportionate number of Jews lost in the world who don't know what to do with themselves. That's why it's not an exaggeration that although we are only 2% of the general population, or maybe even less than that, at the same time we are 40% of all the cults, of all the mishigas, and of all the searching, of all the revolutions and upheavals and changes that are taking place in the world. Because we are not content. Something is not right with the very condition of existence that needs to be explained, and we're not finding an explanation. So we're always ready to turn everything upside down and throw everything away and start all over again in order to find the justification for existence. We had a weekend at Lubavitch House not too long ago. And it turned out that one of the students who was there attending the Shabbaton wasn't Jewish. His father had been Jewish, his mother was not, and so he wasn't a Jew. And he hadn't known this, hadn't realized this. And here we had spent most of the weekend already talking about Yiddishkeit and what a Jew is and so on. Saturday night, he says, I'm very interested, and I find this very fascinating, but I'm not Jewish. Having heard all that he had heard during the course of the weekend, he had realized that not being born to a Jewish mother meant that he wasn't Jewish. And now he wanted to understand what really is the difference between the Jew and the non-Jew. And given his background, and given the information that he had, he could now be in a position to describe the difference between Jew and non-Jew. And his explanation was something along these lines. A good person gives charity. A good Jew also gives charity, gives tzedakah. A good non-Jew can be a decent human being, and a Jew acts like a decent human being. So they seem to be doing the same thing, but not really. When a Jew gives charity, poor man comes to the door and says, I'm hungry, would you give me something? The Jew gives him something to eat. And what the Jew is doing, when he gives a poor man something to eat, is that basically, whether he knows it or not, he is lowering himself. He's bringing himself down from being a divine soul, a part of God, a heavenly creature, and he's placing himself into a level of concern that is really not his field at all. Concern with hunger, with food, with stomachs. The poor man didn't come and say, teach me Torah. The guy came in and said, my stomach is growling. Now, for the Jew, this is otherworldly. Stomachs and food and hunger. What is this? Where does this come from? We are a godly people. We are godly souls. Our place is in heaven. Not in heaven, higher than heaven. Because heaven also is a created place. And we are a part of God. So you come to me with a stomach problem, with food problems? It's like when the Jews came to Moshe in the desert and they said, we need meat. We haven't had any meat. Where's the beef? And Moshe turns to God and says, do you hear what they want from me? They want me to provide them with meat? I'm a teacher. I'm a rabbi. I'm a prophet. I go up mountains. But meat? I should give them meat? What does this world come to? And God says, yes, give them meat. So every Jew, when he's faced with a hungry stomach, that there are hungry stomachs, could feel, this is not my business. My business is godly things, holy things, divine things. But God said, keep kosher. Eat the kosher animals. Don't eat the non-kosher animals. If you see someone is hungry, feed him. You see someone is naked, dress him. If you see someone who is bleeding, heal him. So, okay, all right, if that's what God wants, we'll do it. It's not my line. It's not in my field. It's not my place. but it's my mission. And because it is my mission, I will leave my native condition, which is godliness, and I will get involved with the created world, with the physical world. I'll feed the hungry, dress the naked, and heal the sick, and so on. And that's why the first commandment, the first instruction given to the first Jew, Avraham, was that he should leave. He should go away from his father's home and from his birthplace, to go away from his natural condition, to go away from his natural tendencies and impulses. And this is a statement not only to the first Jew, but to every Jew, to every Jewish soul. Every soul is told, you must leave your place with God, your native home, and go to the place I will tell you. Not to the place you belong, but to the place which I will tell you, God says. Leave the place you belong in and fulfill the mission for which you are sent to earth, the commandments that I will give you. So when a Jew gives tzedakah, he's basically a divine being accepting human obligations. So he is basically humbling himself, lowering himself into the worldly human condition. When a non-Jew gives charity, he is basically a human being, a human condition, trying to elevate himself to something more divine. So, are they doing the same thing? Not at all. They're not. They're doing opposite things. The same act, but coming from opposite directions, accomplishing opposite things. At the end of all this non-Jewish boy who had spent this weekend at Lubavitch House says, you know, that explains something else to me. He says, I had always wondered, why is it that Christianity is so unforgiving, so condemning, whereas in Judaism, if you fail, you'll do better next time, try again. Now he understands, and it makes a little sense too. A Jew is a divine being sent to do something for the world, to accomplish something, to bring some godliness to a worldly condition. By eating kosher food, you do something for the animal kingdom. You give animals a purpose within God's scheme of things, not just within the evolutionary scheme. So fine, you didn't keep kosher yesterday, so what will happen? Keep kosher today, but do it. You didn't do it yesterday, do it today. You can't do it today, do it tomorrow, but do it. That's what you're here for. For the non-Jew who makes it his goal, as they have in Christianity, to become divine, well then if you didn't do it, then you're not divine. If you didn't fulfill or reach some divine level, if you didn't arrive at some divine condition, then you're nowhere. You're where you were before. Nothing's happened. Nothing's accomplished. And that's why, no matter how much good you've done, if you still lust in your heart, then you're condemned. Because what have you accomplished? You're still human. You've gotten nowhere. For all the good things you've done, you're still human. So nothing's changed. And so unless you can stop lusting in your heart, unless you can actually become superhuman, you haven't accomplished anything at all, so you're damned, and that's the end of it. So let's go back to the question of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has a basis in reality. When the non-Jew comes to the Jew and says, what are you? Explain yourself. What do we tell them? We make up stories. We make excuses. We start from Adam and Eve and we give them a history lessons and we go on to Noach. But we don't answer the question. Sometimes the question is asked more bluntly. The non-Jew comes to the Jew and says, you are the chosen people. It says so in the Bible. And you can't give me a straight answer when I ask you what it means. You say, well, I don't know about this chosen. There's a comedian who says how a Jew is proud of his son only if he's a doctor. If he's not all there, he'll settle for a lawyer. But he says you never find a Jew who's proud of his son's truck. My son, the truck driver. Like some people say, my son drives a truck. It's a beauty. You want to come see it? You never hear a Jew saying that. If a Jew has a son who is a truck driver, the father says, if you see him at all, because he hides out of town. But if you find him and you say to him, "Oh, I hear your son drives a truck." He says, "Drives a truck? I don't know if he drives a truck. He sits in the truck. I mean, it's not right that a truck should be going with nobody inside. So he sits in the truck. And if the truck is going, so he controls it. But I don't know, a truck driver, he controls it. Oh, he's a controller in the trucking business. But a truck driver?" So when the non-Jew comes to the Jew and says, "So I hear you're chosen." So we say, "Chosen? I don't know, chosen? Or maybe a little different." You can't get a straight answer. Why don't Jews give straight answers to this particular question? Very simple. Because they don't know. We don't know what we are because nobody ever answered that question for us in Cheder. We were told, "You're Jewish, your grandfather was Jewish, your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, and that's it." So when a non-Jew comes along and says, "What does it mean to be Jewish?" You say, "Well, if your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish." But he knows that. That's not what he's asking. He's not asking who is a Jew. He's asking what is a Jew. And we don't know. So we fake it. We make up stories that don't hold any water. Now, nobody out there in this big world will believe for a moment that we don't know what we are. They figure very simply, if they were the chosen people, they would know it. How can you be chosen and not know? It's ridiculous. So when you come to a Jew, and the Jew says that he doesn't know and he can't give a straight answer, what is the non-Jew supposed to think? They go back home and they ask themselves, why? Why won't they tell us what they are? So if they know only about the Jews of Minsk, for example, they figure the Jews of Minsk are up to something. They're out to do something terrible, and they're trying to hide. What could they possibly be doing terrible in Minsk? They must be poisoning the well. What is there besides a well in Minsk? So they must be poisoning the well. But when they hear from their cousin, who lives in Paris, that the Jews in Paris also don't tell anybody who they are. Now, what are they doing in Paris? Poisoning the wells of Paris? And when they hear that the same thing is happening in Morocco, the Jews of Morocco don't tell anybody who they are, what they are. They say, uh-oh, this is becoming universal. This is a global plot. I mean, what should they think? And what's a universal global plot? To take over the world. It makes a lot of sense. I would think that too. What other excuse could there possibly be for people who are supposed to be God's chosen special people? It says so in the Bible. And yet these people don't know what they are. They won't answer. They won't tell us what they're about. Anti-Semitism obviously has other causes. Anti-Semitism comes about when we behave the way we shouldn't. Anti-Semitism comes from a natural ingrained evil in people. But we're not talking about the hoodlum. We're not talking about the anti-Semite who walks around with a chain and a swastika. But the decent non-Jew who, without any hatred or animosity, is having a problem with the Jew. Very possibly, that problem is because we behave mysteriously. When we don't answer the questions, when we don't talk straight, when we don't know what to say about ourselves that they find hard to believe. So you're obviously going to invite speculation, and not necessarily of the finest nature. We are causing suspicion by not being able to answer this question. And we've seen this over and over again with Israel in recent years. When Israel tries to lean over backwards and be super nice to the Arabs, it's misunderstood. It's taken as a sign of guilt, because if you're right, if you did right, then you have nothing to apologize for. Why are you apologizing? It's because we're super nice. But nobody buys it. Nobody accepts that. When you win a war, you win the war. You don't give back. You say, oh, but the Jews give back because they're very nice. Nobody sees it that way. They see it as the Jews giving back because they feel guilty for having taken it. They must know that it's not theirs, and that's why they want to give back. When we try to be nice, and we say, look, we're not the chosen people. You can be the chosen people. We're all chosen people. We're not any different. We're like you. You're like us. We're just minding our own business. All we want to do is live on the street here and pay our taxes and go to shul in the evening. Our neighbors say, the non-Jewish neighbor says, no, that's not what you're all about. We know better. We know differently. You are a heavenly people. It says so in the Bible. My grandmother told me, Jews are a heavenly people. Why then are you walking around on the streets making like you live here, like you belong here? Tell me who you are. Oh, I'm just a neighbor from down this baloney. You're not from down the street. You're not even from down the block. You're not even from downtown. You're not from this world. And therefore, tell me, explain to me what you're here for, what you're doing. And we keep saying, who, me? Same as you. No, you're not the same as me. This is my land, the non-Jew says. This is my world. This is my created condition. And you come from some other world. So why are you here? There's an amazing story about a group of Jews who were running from the Germans. It's a true story. And one of the Jews in the group was the Amshanover Rebbe. He was a young man at the time. And they fled into Japan. They came to the Japanese authorities and said, we're looking for a safe place to be. We're looking for asylum. And the official there said to one of them, he said, give me one good reason that we should accept you when all those other countries are throwing you out. If they hate you, why should we accept you? And they realized that answering this question can determine their fate. So they turned to the Amshanover Rebbe and they said, think of something. Talk to him. Say something convincing. So the Rebbe went over to the Japanese official and he said to them, those countries that are throwing us out, they hate us because we are really Asians. And the official was so impressed that he gave them asylum and made things very comfortable for them there in Japan. So the point is, it's not that we're from down the block, we're from the wrong continent, we're from the wrong world, we're from the wrong condition of creation, and we cannot walk down the street and say, I'm just like you, I'm minding my own business, I'm an American, I pay taxes. No, what are you doing here? Why are you stealing our land? Why do you make believe you live here when you really don't? And the analogy, a very simple analogy, a teacher walks into a classroom and he's dressed like the students and he sits on the floor like the students and he says, okay, what should we do now? Acting like one of the students. Everyone in the class will hate him. Everyone. It'll be universal, unanimous. Everyone will hate him. If he comes into the classroom and he has a good lesson prepared and he's got something to say, a few will be disinterested. A few will be annoyed by the lesson because they don't want to learn, because they're the riffraff. But the intelligent student will be thrilled, and they will usually be the majority. If we're going to come to this world, if we're going to be the chosen people, then we have to act that way. Otherwise, we generate suspicion. If we walk into the classroom and we're from heaven, we're a part of God, sent to do something to this world or with this world, for the world, and we sit there and say, well, I don't know. I have the same questions you have. I've got the same problems you have. They're all going to hate us. You are the teachers. Get up and teach or get out of the classroom. And that's what they're saying. That, in a nutshell, is anti-Semitism. Either show me what makes you chosen and what you're sent to do, or get off my property. You're stealing my land. And that's why, when we behave like Jews, when we behave like chosen people, nobody has any questions. Equality doesn't mean that we have to be the same. I've never heard of anybody who hates Einstein for being so smart. And if somebody's brilliant, a lot smarter than you, then fine, then he's a lot smarter than you. You don't hate him for that, because there's no suspicion. You know exactly what he is. He's very smart, so he's the smart guy. And if somebody is a Beethoven, you don't hate him for it. You don't complain what gives him the right to have talent, because there's no mystery there. There's no hatred there. A talented man is a guy who uses his talents. What's the complaint? But when we stand around saying, I'm not chosen, I don't know, then the world says, you're not telling me the truth. Why aren't you telling me the truth? What are you trying to pull? What are you up to? Why do you insult my intelligence by playing dumb? I've read the Bible. It says you're chosen. Why won't you admit it? I actually heard this from a minister, a Baptist minister, who brings his class to Lubavitch House to hear or learn about Judaism. And he had taken his class to one of the local synagogues, a conservative synagogue, and they had talked about the chosen people. And the speaker there, the ritual director or the rabbi, tried to explain to them how they don't believe in this idea of chosenness. They reject the concept as being contrary to their egalitarian and democratic principles. And therefore, the whole thing is irrelevant to them, and this whole business of being chosen is an immoral concept. It's something that they can't accept, and so on and so on. So I asked the minister, what was your reaction to that? So he says that I talked to the students about it on our way home, and basically the students said that they didn't believe him. In other words, they know that the Jews are the chosen people, and they didn't believe that the Jew or the rabbi or the spokesman there at the synagogue was unaware or did not believe that he was chosen. And they were very disturbed. They found it very disturbing and disappointing. And they decided they were not going to go back there the next year. The world not only is willing to accept that Jews are different, the world wants Jews to be different. The world is not only willing to enjoy the talents or the uniqueness of other people, the world needs those other talents. The world needs that uniqueness, and particularly today. I mean, we see it even in the political arena. America looking to Israel to do something, to unravel the mess that we're in for the last 10 years. People have been pointing fingers at Israel. Why doesn't Israel do something? Why don't they fix it? Why don't they bring peace to the Middle East or bring peace to the world? Why are they pointing fingers at Israel? There's some truth to that too, because Israel can and will be the answer. Nobody else. Syria is not going to be the answer. Egypt is not going to be the answer. Saudi Arabia is not the answer. Russia is not the answer. The world wants leadership. And who are they going to look to for moral leadership if not to the Jew? And then when we turn around and we say, oh, no, we're no different, we're no better, they don't want to hear that. They're not willing to accept that. They don't buy it. It only makes them suspicious that we're up to no good. Now, when you're asked this question, and you have to answer it on one foot, you obviously have to find the right words with which to convey this message. A Jew is a different kind of creature, with a different soul. And our purpose on earth, even though we don't belong here, our purpose on earth is to elevate the physical condition and bring it closer to God, thereby making it easier for all people to serve God. That's what we're here for. What makes a Jew is not the fact that we were chosen at some point in history, but that we were created this way to begin with. A Jew is a piece of God sent to earth. That's what a Jew is. And in that, there is no choice. When it says in Torah that at the receiving of the Torah, the giving of the Torah, we became the chosen people, what that means is that in those areas where a choice would be necessary, in other words, in those areas where a Jew and a non-Jew are alike, in human activity, in human affairs, in the human condition in which we do share with the non-Jew, the body, the physical existence, in this, the body of the Jew is not different from the body of the non-Jew. But when Torah was given, The Jew's physical condition, the body of the Jew, was chosen. Although it was once the same as other people, it was then chosen. From now on, the soul is not going to be a stranger in the body, but the body was going to become Jewish as well. And what does the Torah do for us? What Torah does for us is gives us ways and instruction in how we are to bring this unique divine soul into action in the physical world. Here you have a divine soul. It's living on earth. It has a mission. But how is it going to do it? What is it going to do? It doesn't want to eat. It doesn't want money. It doesn't want physical pleasures. It doesn't want physical comforts. What does it want to do with this physical world? Torah was given to us so that the soul can do physical things without compromising its divinity. When Torah says, eat this way, this is a way that a soul can eat. Otherwise, it can't eat. When Torah says, dress this way, modestly, go through business in this fashion, that makes it possible for a divine soul to engage in those physical activities without doing violence to itself. Otherwise, it couldn't do it, it would refuse to do it. So what happened at the giving of the Torah is that our neshama, that which we had all along, which is what makes us Jewish to begin with, gained access to the physical world because the commandments permits the neshama to do physical things in a divine fashion. And what that means is that not only is the soul divine, but now, as a result of Torah, the body becomes divine. So what was chosen at the giving of the Torah was our bodies, but in soul, we were always Jewish. In that, there is no choice. That's why the question is not, are we chosen? The question is, what makes you Jewish? The question is, where is the evidence? This class from the Baptist school once asked this question in exactly these words. Because you are the chosen people, how does that express itself? He wasn't questioning the fact of being chosen. He said, you are the chosen people. What he wanted to know was, where does it show? And luckily, he had asked this question just a very short time after the Entebbe raid, the rescue in Entebbe. So I was able to explain to him that here's a case where an otherwise seemingly political body, a state, the state of Israel, had captives taken in another country. And what does a country do when this happens, when citizens are held hostage? What the world does is that you negotiate. That's the way of the world. That's how it had been all along. All of a sudden, Israel says, no, we don't negotiate. We don't negotiate. It's against Jewish principle to give in to ransom, to give in to exorbitant ransom. It's an old Jewish law, and we've had plenty of experience at this. The rabbi of a community may not be ransomed for exorbitant amounts. Why? Because it'll encourage kidnapping. So the rabbi of the community must be abandoned, not ransomed, if the amounts are exorbitant, so as not to encourage this kind of activity. So Israel refuses. Israel says, no, we don't negotiate with terrorists. There is no ransom money, there's no exchange of prisoners, nothing, forget it. This was not a political move. Politically, it was a very dangerous thing to do. It violated all sorts of laws. They entered into the airspace of other countries and so on. And yet the world was thrilled. Because here was a political body that did something on purely ideological grounds. There was no other reason for it. They could easily have exchanged prisoners. They were doing it all the time in those days. And they chose not to. Will the non-Jew accept this explanation? There's no question. It's a reality. When they're given this explanation with a little evidence, they not only accept it, they feel relieved, unburdened. Finally, they understand what was a mystery all these years, and they want to understand. One of these classes, there were about 200 students in an assembly room, and we're talking about the chosen people, and the neshama coming down to earth and the mission and so on. And after finished explaining all this, and this is the first time I had said this to a group of religious Baptists, I was wondering what the reaction is going to be. One guy raises his hand and he says, "So what are we?" What Jews are, he now understood. Jews are the chosen people. Now his question was, so what are we? And an amazing thing, afterwards I was talking to one of the teachers, and I said, isn't it sad that a kid who goes to religious school, who has gone to the seminary all his life, and he's raised in his belief and raised with the Bible, raised with these teachings, and after all these years, he has to ask me what he is? And the teacher really surprised me. The teacher says, well, he needs to know. In Torah, wherever it talks about a convert, the expression is never a non-Jew who converts to Judaism. It's the convert who converts to Judaism. A non-Jew does not become a Jew. A Jew can't become a non-Jew, and a non-Jew cannot become a Jew. Wherever the Torah talks about conversion, it says the convert who converts, which means, and for this we have to get into some sophisticated Kabbalistic things. There are three kinds of people. There is the Jew, there is the non-Jew, and there is the convert before he converts. So a convert is someone who is something between Jewish and non-Jewish until he converts and then is fully Jewish. What does this mean? It means that there are some people in the world who, although they are born non-Jewish and are not Jewish, yet they carry within them some spark of a Jewish soul that demands and yearns to go back to being Jewish. And therefore, the person can't rest until he has converted. If there's a person in that condition, where they have this spark or dimension of a Jewish soul, not that they have Jewish qualities, I mean that they act so nice they might as well be Jewish, but they actually have a part of a Jewish soul. It's not visible, it doesn't show, and therefore we can't tell. We can't say this person has that kind of, but that state of a convert makes this person uncomfortable and forces him to convert. And that's why the traditional response to a prospective convert is that we discourage. We put him off, we tell him it's not worth it, we tell him it's difficult, it's dangerous to be Jewish. And if he refuses to be discouraged, then we know that he is truly this kind of a convert who is moved by some spark in his soul to become Jewish, and it is irresistible. He himself cannot say no to it. The truth is that we find all through Torah statements that seem to imply this concept. For example, we have two commandments. One is to love God, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then it says, love your fellow Jew as much as you love yourself. It's very similar. It says, for example, concerning tzaddikim, that just as you fear God, you should fear the tzaddik. And so we find that Torah itself draws these parallels and says that anything you're going to do for God, do for your fellow Jew. Anything you're going to do for your fellow Jew, do for God. So there's a very thin line, and I'm not sure we need to worry about it. We are to treat each other as divine beings because that's what we are. And that's why it says that, what does it mean to love God? Actually, what does that mean? What do you do about your love for God? Well, one thing is that you follow the commandments. But another thing is, when you really love God, then you will love every Jew. Because if you love someone, you love his children as well. So there's a direct carryover. Our feelings for God carry over to the parts of God that run around in this world. And our feelings to the parts of God eventually carry over to God himself. So when you're talking about a person, of course, you're not allowed to worship the person because half of him is physical. But if you're talking about the soul, about the the Jew in him, the soul is God. You can worship it if you want. When we talk about the Shekhinah, which is the feminine part of God, or the part of God that dwells on earth, the part of God that is within us, what does the Shekhinah mean? It means the collective Jewish souls. That's the part of God that dwells on earth, the souls of Jews. And that's why it's been said by non-Jewish theologians, Jews are the presence of God on earth. And that's why those individuals in history who have excelled in their hatred to God were determined to wipe out the Jews. Because Jews are God's presence on earth. So let's sum this up a little bit. In being chosen, we have one of three options. Either we're going to continue to insist that we never heard of it, that it's a new idea to us, we never heard of it, or we're going to stay in the middle and not know whether we're coming or going or what to say. Or we're going to say, yes, we are chosen, and therefore have a responsibility to live up to that title. If that's the worst that can happen, that if we accept it and we say, yes, we're different, we're special, we're Jewish, we're chosen, we're created from God's thought, if that will lead us to behaving that way, to living up to the title of the chosen people, then by all means, let's do it. That's the right thing. Let's throw in the towel, give up the fight, and say, okay, we are chosen, and let's be it.